everybody, Mark Schaftlein with you, and this is the Schaftlein Report. We're going to cover everything. We're going to cut through all the propaganda, give it to you straight from left, right, and center. The opinions are what counts. Hello, everybody. Mark Schaftlein with you, and this is the Schaftlein Report. It's the weekend edition, and I'd like to welcome back my two guests, Joe Visconti from the great state of Connecticut and Lee Elci from the great city of Boston. Lee and Joe, welcome back to Schaftlein Report. Happy to have you with me today.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you, guys.
Hey, Joe, let me start off with you. I mean, this past week, did you ever imagine in your life you would see what we've seen on college campuses this past week?
Well, it was coming. The left is just looking for anything, and even though the base of the Democrat Party is made up of a lot of Jewish American voters, and a lot of these kids, Jewish American kids, go to these schools. It was a conflict that was going to come, and I'm praying to God that there's no violence with the kids in school, and this is mostly protest and doesn't go any further. But yeah, I felt it for a long time. I have a lot of Jewish friends, and we talk about why do they vote Republican and Democrat. That issue is just not going to go away, but it's now ended up with the kids. And I just hope in a few weeks, when college is over, that no one's harmed in college campuses. And it's just a sad day for America.
Yeah, and Lee, you're in a great northeastern city. What are your listeners' kind of feedback are they giving you? I mean, as Mark Levin said, we've got the Hitler Corps out there. I mean, this is astounding.
Yeah. It's mostly outrage, to be honest with you. My listeners are furious, as am I. I think what we're witnessing on college campuses is despicable. I think these kids are, way crossing the line. The anti-Semitism that's happening in the United States right now it's deplorable, to use a word from Hillary Clinton, right? It's deplorable what's going on. I'm actually disgusted, and I think what needs to happen is show these kids some video footage of Auschwitz, show them some video footage of some of these concentration camps where the people are coming out, weighing 75 pounds and being full adult males. It's horrible what we're witnessing, and we need to rally behind our Jewish allies, because what we're watching is really, it's sad. I mean, I'm really disappointed in our college students.
Lee, I echo your sentiment 100%. And, Speaker Johnson goes up to Columbia to speak. He gets jeered. And yet Columbia's president is negotiating with these students. I mean, they didn't negotiate down in Austin, Texas, where you have Greg Abbott as governor. He sent the mounted police in. Something, Lee, and I'm going to follow up with you, and Joe, I'm going to come back to you. This cuts across party lines. I mean, why is Joe Biden silent on this? I mean, can you imagine the outrage across the country if this was being directed at African Americans, Hispanics, Asian Americans? You can't imagine what it would be like. People would have been arrested by now, and the FBI would be involved. They would have sent in, who knows, the CIA maybe. I mean,
I could not agree with you more. 1,000% correct. If this were any other group of people, there would be nationwide fury and outrage. But because it's Jewish Americans, there seems to be this, let's pull back, let's enable these young kids, let's let them do their thing. You are 1,000% right. And the most feckless leader that this country has ever had sits back in silence because he needs those Michigan votes. It's a disgrace. And I watch it every day, and I get more and more angry as I watch it. You think about how the most reliable ally that we have is under constant attack. And these are kids, by the way, kids who just want to go to school, kids who want to finish an education. It's, and the fact that, some college presidents are actually at least doing something, but Columbia it's been a disaster. Like you said, to negotiate with these people, come on.
Yeah, no, I can't comprehend it. And Joe, let me ask you this question. Where is Senator Schumer, Senator Gillibrand? Where's all the Democratic senators who are failing to call this out?
Well, I'm going to be going to New York City tomorrow, and hopefully I get some video footage of what's going on at his house. But I have to tell you, I fly the Israeli flag on my property in West Hartford, Connecticut, which is the most Jewish town in Connecticut, and I have it up. And the other day on my front steps was a bag with a bottle of wine and a card from a lady from a Hadash Society saying, "Thank you so much." I'm not even Jewish; I'm Italian. "Thank you so much for flying the Israeli flag. It did my heart so good." And I've had many people in town come up, and they're afraid to fly the flag. They're afraid. This is the biggest problem. They just can't believe it's happening to them again. And so being Italian is different than what they went through. And I was raised with a lot of Jewish kids, and they're just astounded. It's hitting the core of their being, as though the Holocaust, like Lee was just saying, was wiped out, and AI may remove it, or the Gemini on Google may remove it in the future. So they're looking at their whole race, 5,000 years of, wow, it's happening to us again. So this is pretty systemic racism that's going on in America right now, and it's being condoned by the college presidents and the college professors. They're not speaking out. They have tenure. They can't be fired. Many of them are Jewish, especially at Columbia. And so this is a new thing for the left, and I believe it's going to be a party platform plank. And that means to the listeners and viewers out there that this issue becomes Israel is the enemy, like the white supremacist Republican 2A gun owners are, and they're now going to be grouped in with all of us. And it's crazy because Jewish is anti-KKK and all that. It's just nuts. But they're going to make this a party platform, and American Jews are going to have to decide: are you going to vote another way, or are you going to stay home? Because this is going to affect the election. Already African Americans and Spanish are way over for Trump, coming over more. And the Jewish, not that they need it for Trump, but for normalcy, for peace, for Americanism. I mean, what's going on? It's definitely shaking the ground like an earthquake to all the American Jews right now. I know that firsthand from all my friends calling me.
Lee, what percentage of these college students do you think are actually participating in these ridiculous stunts? Any sense? I know it varies across the country, but where you guys are in the Northeast, not too far from New York City.
I think a lot of people want to say it's a small amount, but I think it's larger than let's say people want to believe, because I think it's not necessarily the agitators, but it's the sheep that follow along, right? So you got the friend of the friend of the friend, because some of these protests are thousands of people there, and obviously that's a serious issue. So I think, though, the main agitators, those are small groups, small pockets of people, but it builds, right? You got your friends, you got your roommates, you got that kind of a situation happens, and the next thing you know, you got 1,000 people at a protest. I just want to, if you don't mind, I want to back up for a second. I did something Friday morning on my radio broadcast that I think maybe we should do more of. Is I played about 10 minutes of a Holocaust survivor, unedited, just let it go. And I'll tell you, the people who were listening to my show, the emails that I got, the outpouring of emotion for that was amazing. And I just think these kids need to realize whose side they're standing with. Like, being on the side of the Palestinians in this argument, you are in bed with Hamas. You are in bed with terror. And that is just not acceptable, period.
Yeah. No, I'm in your camp. Again, all of us are in the same camp on this. And the crazy stuff, I'll give you some feedback here from the West Coast. USC, University of Southern California, they had to postpone their graduation to a point where there is no live graduation anymore. Lee, they would put 60,000 people, in the LA Coliseum. That's not happening now. I mean, imagine that. You go to school for 4 years, and in the course of about 10 days, 2 weeks, with hopefully a crescendo happening, this past week, now all of a sudden you're not going to have your graduation. And then, again, it's spread to UCLA. So, I mean, this is not an isolated thing for Columbia, for NYU, and we'll just say some of the Ivy League schools. We saw what happened in Texas. We've seen it in Southern California. And, gentlemen, in my opinion, political leaders have to speak out about this. It can't just be your friendly talk show host that we're talking about here. It has to be political leaders. And I have seen on the Republican side, at least, there has been some, forceful comments about it. But on the Democratic side, crickets. I mean, it is truly shocking. Joe, what's it going to take to get Democrats to condemn this?
Well, I'm from Connecticut again, and so isn't Lee, and we look at our senator, Blumenthal, Jewish. Come on, his wife owns the Empire State Building. And I've been tweeting it or Xing out, whatever they call it now, for like a week. I mean, you can go on my wall at Joe Visconti. I'm like, hey, what are you going to do? Again, this is, Jewish Americans are a lot like Italian Americans. They're very family oriented beyond the politics, okay? They're family oriented. They're really close. They support each other and faith-based. And so we have a lot in common. And I just don't know, as I talked to a lot of my Jewish friends, call the senator, call him up, or John Larson, or Rosa DeLauro, or Joe Courtney in Lee's district, or Jim Himes. These are all leaders in Washington. And so, and they're all silent. They're all silent. And it's almost like the Twilight Zone. How could you get such silence when such atrocities are about to happen?
Yeah, no, I'm astounded by it. But Lee, I am encouraged by one thing. Some states are now starting to arrest these ridiculous protesters. I mean, we saw it in Texas. We've seen it at different settings across the country. I mean, do you think it's going to be one of these things where we have to have mass arrests of these college students to, quote, stop this ridiculous uprising we have, where we have young snowflakes basically sitting in jail and melting? I mean, how does this end, Lee?
I don't know if you can arrest thousands and thousands of people. I like I said, I go back to my original thought, which is just extreme disappointment. But echoing something Joe said, which is silence. When you're silent on this issue, you're complicit, right? So if you're not saying anything as a politician, to me, you're on board with the problem. So all of the politicians across the country who say nothing, they, to me, are in bed and on the side of Hamas in this issue. And to take it another step, when you had mentioned the University of Southern California not being able to have graduation, and that's something that's probably going to happen in other schools. Imagine being a family who, let's say your daughter is graduating. She's the first one to graduate from college. And maybe you're from another state. You get plane tickets, you get a hotel. None of it's refundable. So you had planned on making this huge event, a huge thing for your daughter or son's day. And now you can't, because they cancel it because there is the threat of violence. We have to stand up, man. We have to stand up to this insanity, this anarchy on college campuses. And you know what? If it does take, let's say, police, the National Guard, or these SWAT teams going in and sweeping, 150, 200 kids to knock it down a peg, I'm all for it, man, because what I'm watching at Columbia and some of these Ivy League schools, if I had kids there, I'd pull them out, because it's a dangerous situation. If I had a Jewish child who was going to school at Columbia or Harvard, I'd have to pull them out. I want my money back, although you're not going to get your money back. That's what I would ask for.
Well, again, this is beyond the pale. And it's interesting thing, Lee and Joe, Americans over the age of 40, almost by a large majority, I'm talking 75, 80%, support Israel. But when you get down sub 30-year-olds, it's like half and half. And I'm going back to the original comment here. Israel lost 1,200 citizens. They were murdered. And yet the people who are sitting here supporting the Palestinians are really supporting Hamas. And I mean, they're not even making any secret, but it's gotten worse than that. Now you're seeing the anti-Semitism ratcheted up to 10, where they're actually calling for extermination of Jews. I mean, this is so far beyond anything that's happened in this country in a long time. And I just got my profound disappointment in these young students. Guys, we're going to do this. We're going to break for 60, but when we come back, the Biden administration did not get the best economic news in the world. We're going to tackle that one right after we come back from break. See you in 60.
The world is about to shift. Banks are going cashless globally with the emergence of central bank digital currency, which will bring with it programmable money and the ability to turn on or off your purchasing power based on your digital social profile. It's like the equivalent of spyware in your bank account. You need to get out of the system with the world's safest and most private assets, silver and gold. Call Kirk Elliott, PhD at 877-547-5743. That's 877-KIRK-PhD.
And we're back. Lee, let me ask you this. Last week, the economic news came out. Growth, which was originally forecast by the Federal Reserve to be 2.4%, it came in at 1.6%. That's even below the 1.8% trend that we're used to. Inflation remains sticky. We're still up near 3%, a full point above the Fed's goal. And Lee, it looks like hopes for a rate cut on Wall Street have been dashed, at least pushed back to September. How are you seeing things economically right now? Because this news is not what the Biden administration wanted to see.
Well, it's no surprise to me. I think this is something that we all sort of knew was in the pipeline. It's a bad economy. I mean, just ask any family of four, ask anyone who's struggling every week to try to make the paycheck at the end when they're dipping into either their savings or they're having to go into credit card debt. We're at record credit card debt in this country. Record, by the way, also home debt, home credit debt as well. So what Biden or Bidenomics has done has essentially begun the collapse of our United States economy. And his answers are only more problems. So, yeah, I'm not surprised by this at all. In fact, I almost think it's inflated. I think it's even worse than the numbers indicate. You've got more homeless on the street than ever before. You know, I drive around my local neighborhood pretty much anytime you're getting to any kind of an intersection where there are any groups of people that pass by, like a lot of traffic. You've got homeless folks who are setting up. This is everywhere. This is on every street corner across the country. It's just exploding. So no, this is not a shock to me. The economy's in the dump, and I think, you know, as we move forward, this only helps Trump out, because everyone knows that for the most part, Americans vote with their pocketbooks. So as this continues, this, I think, emboldens even more and more Trump supporters to say, look, this is just not working. We need something else.
Right. Now, and you mentioned Trump and the economy. Trump leads Biden by somewhere from 25 to 30 points when it comes to economic issues. And Joe, you and I have talked a little bit about this in the past. With the interest rates where they are right now and the Federal Reserve not cutting, mortgages are 7% or north. So I've seen some of them 7.5%, 7.75%. But when you get north of 7%, and you have real estate prices sitting up here at an all-time high, Joe, how are young people ever going to buy a house? I mean, no wonder they're frustrated. I mean, I'm not going to justify what they did with Israel, obviously, but economically, young people are at a huge disadvantage because home prices keep going up and they can't afford them.
Yeah, my daughter just came out of New York after 10 years. She's back home with me. She's an adult. My son's an adult. He lives with me. I told him, stash your cash, kids, put it away. I'm hardly home anyway. I travel a lot, and just stay in the big house we got. And because wait for something else to happen. And I know that's happening everywhere. You know, in their 20s, they didn't want to come home, but now, you know, it's like, wait. And so I think you're going to see that. And then more of the kids that are coming out of college, 24, 25, 26, 27 years old, with degrees, the jobs aren't there. I know from my older son, who's really white collar, he's like, Dad, there's nothing in New York. It's just, they're offering $40,000 a year, and you can't live in New York for that, because he's down that way. And so you're going to see a pile on where the kids are going to come out with degrees. They can't get jobs. AI, blame it on high tech, the replacement of the workers. That's all going to crash, and you're going to see more kids coming home, or maybe homeschooling college in the future. It's a mess. We're going through a change of technology, and what we didn't need is to have political corruption and crazy political policies like Biden has brought in, on top of the transition we're making into artificial intelligence, job replacement, automation. So we're really just by itself, without the Republican Democrat thing, just that by itself is a mess.
You know, Lee, when Joe Biden proposed his budget, and a lot of people lost in the weeds over this, he specifically came out and said he is going to allow the Trump tax cuts to expire. And he gets the cheers, from the Democratic base. What people don't realize, it's not the wealthy and the super wealthy who that's going to affect. It's going to affect average Americans. Lee, people are, if this ever came into law, if this actually happened and Congress passed it, Americans are going to get a massive tax whack at a point in time where the economy is stagnant at best. How in the world can someone support getting rid of one of the most successful economic times? Or is this just a case of whatever Trump did is bad and we're going to let it expire to, quote, soak the rich?
I think that this goes right to the media being sort of the arm of the Democrat Party, right? So you can probably go to most Democrat households, even though they're struggling, and even though they benefited from the Trump tax cuts, and because let's say the media bias and that way to web a story or weave a story that is untrue, they are really good at it. So this misnomer about the Trump tax cuts, I mean, we're better off under Donald Trump economically by a mile. And this is like play 5 out of the Democrat playbook, right next to racism. It's let's tax what we say is going to be the rich, but eventually those taxes end up hammering the middle class. That's the way it's been for 40 years. And if they continue this, there'll be even a wider gap between the ultra rich and the poor. You've got this middle class that's shrinking into nothing because they just don't have any more disposable income because they're being taxed to death, period.
And Joe, let me ask you this. Along the lines of the taxes like Lee was just talking about, Biden is now talking about raising the capital gains tax. And you know what that does? I mean, that, on top of everything Lee just said, that's going to make the situation way worse. How in the world, Joe, can we be in an economy that is stagnant, and here our president is advocating raising the capital gains tax, which is going to do nothing but reduce investment?
Well, it's kind of funny because in 2016, I did a lot of politicking for Trump in Greenwich, in Fairfield County. And that was the issue, the carried interest of 15%. And for your listeners out there, if you have stocks that you're holding in investments, you're only taxed at 15%. You're not taxed as though you sold them and profited. And so Hillary Clinton at the time was saying Trump was going to get rid of the carried interest. And he said, no, I'm going to keep it. Well, that's what this is all about. They're going to definitely lose. The Democrats will definitely lose the election. That actual vote, not because of Trump, but because of the fear of carried interest being changed, is what won Hillary Clinton, Fairfield County, and most of your coastal towns in Connecticut, which are very affluent, and they got spooked about that. So what's going to happen now is with this year, say goodbye. Wall Street's completely going to go for Trump. Then you've got the unions in New York going for Trump. I mean, every move you could make as a Democrat, as the Biden administration, I don't think they even understand what they're doing. That's what's scaring me. If they don't know natural policies and finance rules and how it works, that means they don't know anything. The people behind Biden in the White House. And that's a scary thing to think.
Oh, I agree with you completely. Lee, the best example I can give of an administration clearly not looking out for the best interests of the American people is this infatuation with electric vehicles. My goodness. We're seeing Tesla stock near 52-week lows. It's had a slight bounce the last 2 days, but it's been trending down. You have Ford Motor Company. Ford, a great, iconic American company. Get a load of this, folks. Their electric vehicle division lost $1.3 billion. That's 1.3 with a B, billion. They made 10,000 cars. Lee, that comes out to an astounding loss of $132,000 a car. This insanity cannot keep up.
There are cities in this country, we have a couple in Connecticut that are going all electric, right? Eventually, they won't be able to afford it. First of all, the actual price of the vehicle is about at least 2 times as much as it would be for a gasoline-powered vehicle. And there are no charging stations ready to go. So a lot of these places are turning to electric vehicles without the proper mechanism in place to actually be able to charge these things up. They don't think, here's the thing. I always say this. The one thing that bothers me, there's two things that bother me about the Democrats. They're all hypocrites, and they never consider unintended consequences. They never put that into the equation. So yeah, if you build an electric vehicle that consumers want at a price that is doable, with charging stations that they can go to and be convenient and charge their car in 5 minutes or less, like you can putting gas into it, people may be able to buy it and want it and whatever. But when you force it down America's throat, it is the absolute worst thing that you can do. So it is certainly a pet peeve of mine. Listen, I'm proud to put gasoline in my car. I hate it when it goes up, but you know what? I'd rather have a gasoline powered truck that I drive to work every day than one of these Teslas, and it's not for me.
What are you guys paying for gasoline in Connecticut right now?
A super unleaded is $4.59 as of yesterday. Put that in my Jag. And it's $3.75, so it's creeping up. Memorial Day, that's what it does. Our heating bill, I've told you this before, starts to go down. It's still cool out, so people still have the heat on. It's the end of April, and so they'll just ramp up the gas prices. But, to defend electric in the future, I think it would be a great thing in the future when the technology arrives. It hasn't arrived. And that's the whole key issue here, from making the batteries to the recharging. The whole thing is like this is like 1904, with the automobile. It's not ready for prime time. And so I applaud those who want to, in the future, lay it out and roll it out and get it ready. God bless them. But it's just not mainstream. It really isn't. And like motorcycles aren't for everybody, electric cars aren't for everybody.
Well, Lee and Joe, let me let you smile about this one. Here in Southern California, we're paying $5.79 a gallon for gasoline. And if you want to get super premium, you're looking $5.99 or $6 a gallon. So it's just bizarre what you're seeing happen. And again, I've traveled all across the country. Down in Florida, it was in the mid threes, upper threes, and come back out here and it's like, my God, sticker shock. So yeah, it doesn't seem to matter which way they go. The Democrats, they shut down coal-fired power plants. I mean, that's no more. It can't do that anymore. What happens to electric bills? Places that depend on that, they go through the roof. So it's like you guys said earlier. What are the consequences? They never think them through. And again, I always say this about Democrats and the Democratic Party. They double down on stupid. Look what they did. I mean, they tried to, I don't even want to get into it on the economics piece, but they tried to outlaw menthol cigarettes until they got massive blowback. And then late yesterday on Friday, we're not so certain we're going to go about that. Listen, there's a lot to talk about here, but we're going to do one thing. Break for 60, but when we come back, we're going to get into the politics and let you know where the state of the race is right now. Trump, Biden, and a cast of 3 more. Be back in 60.
Did you know that thousands of authors across the country have written books and published them with Page Publishing? If you've written a book, Page Publishing can help you through the process. We cut through the confusion of the publishing world to make it easy for you. If we decide to publish your book, your work ends and ours begins. From copy editing and proofing to typesetting and book cover art, we get you printed, distributed, and sold on Amazon, Apple iTunes, and in bookstores across the country. We'll even help you promote your book. That's right, we do all this for you. Biography, self-help, mystery, novels, sci-fi, even a children's book. No matter what genre, Page Publishing can bring your book to life. Call today for your free author submission kit and find out how you can be the next published author at Page Publishing.
Call for your free author submission kit at 855-993-2114. That's 855-993-2114.
And we're back. Joe, let me turn to you because you and I have been talking for the better part of the last 2 years. Polls, where Trump is. You seem to have a pretty strong opinion that Trump's up by more than the polling indicates. And we've had polls come out this week. Folks, it depends on whether you're looking at a right-leaning publication, a left-leaning publication, or someone, say, like Quinnipiac Gallup right down the middle. But one thing, Joe, that's been consistent, Donald Trump has had bigger leads and he's had small leads, but Trump continues to maintain a lead. And averages are running about 2 points over Biden. 47-45 is about where the national average is. But the key, Joe, he's up in 6 out of 7 swing states. What do you make of the polling right now? Fact, fiction, is Trump's numbers really greater than that, or are the polls pretty accurate right now?
Well, there's enough polls that have been done, and it's the question they ask, and we know all about how that happens. But it depends on what time they're polling, what time of the year they're polling, what the issues and the questions are. And right now, the reason Trump is up all the time is everything is going wrong. We have to remember there are more Democrats. That's why Hillary won the popular vote. Al Gore won the popular vote. I mean, there's just more of them. So the poll numbers can really be diluted, and not all polls actually ration properly to make up for that difference. But I think that the New York play, which is definitely going to happen with Trump having a rally in South Bronx as well as Madison Square Garden. He announced that yesterday or on Friday, I believe. And so what's going to happen there is that's 28 electoral college votes. Don't suspect he can't win. And so right now the Democrats are going to have to defend more than just the swing states. But Nevada is what really shocked me. When I saw Nevada's poll, there was a couple of them on them. He was up 7 or 8 or 9 points in Nevada. That's something they haven't talked about. And we know he could have won it in 2020. So I think the polls are probably as close as they're going to be at this time in the race. And I just think that the Democrats know that. But at the same time, the Democrats haven't connected that reality to their policymaking. And that's the thing we spoke about just now. Their policies aren't changing according to what the polls are showing them. They don't care. They figure you're going to what? Have a stop the second steal, or just mail out more ballots, or have the bird flu. I don't know what's on their mind. Or maybe they're going to have the old Occupy Wall Street, BLM, Antifa, and now the Free Palestine people riot all year like they did in 2020. They have no constructive answers. The Democrat Party. I'm sorry, it's become parasitic in nature, and because it's parasitic, it can't create.
Lee, what are your listeners telling you about the polls? Do they believe him? They think Trump's up? Is it Biden? What are your listeners telling you?
Well, I think most of the listeners, like Joe, are very confident that Trump has the lead. I no longer, since 2016, I used to be a believer in polls, but 2016 sort of changed my attitude a little bit of how much trust I put into certain polls. So, and I do think we're maybe a little bit too far out. We still have hopefully a debate to go through and sort of, get through the summertime, or at least get into the middle of the summer before the polls actually solidify a little bit. But I go back to this. I mean, I don't know, forget about party. I don't know how anyone who is a red, white, and blue American can actually fill in the little bubble dot for Joe Biden, knowing that this man cannot physically get through 4 years. I mean, mentally / physically get through 4 years. It is a disservice to the United States of America to put this guy in. It's almost treasonous. I'm actually nervous about it, because I don't believe that he can successfully navigate another 4 years. I think it's dangerous. I think it makes us look weak. And we were talking about this actually yesterday on the air about how would we look at China or Russia if they had a feeble old man as president? We look at them completely different. So I'm concerned about it. Certainly, I think it's a little too early, though, to really dive deep headfirst into the pool about the polls.
Yeah, I will echo that to a degree. One thing that's been consistent, though, and I'm going to take your point there, Lee, a large percentage of the electorate, Republican, Democrat, and Independent, feel that Joe Biden is not physically up to the job. I mean, folks, we take no joy in saying that about our president. We only have one president at a time, and he's currently our president. But it really is bad. I mean, when you see him, just like he was reading that speech the other day, they talked about 4 more years, pause. What? What did you just say?
Right.
And then, it came out on Friday that, now he's going to have different aides walking with him to Air Force One or to the Marine One. And, again, this cuts across parties. So, Lee, with those type of ailments, and again, we don't wish this on anyone, but it's just a fact. He has some physical and he's got some mental issues. We don't want to see that, but it's real. And I tend to be in your camp. I think it makes us as a country look weak. And when Putin's waging war in Ukraine and she's contemplating possibly doing something in Taiwan, probably not until after the election, but my goodness, you look at Trump compared to Biden, a large segment of the voting public, 59%, doesn't trust Trump, but upwards 65, 70% think Biden just doesn't have the physical stamina for the job.
Listen, the three of us, everyone watching this terrific show, I mean, we're Americans first, right? So yes, party makes a difference, but in this case, it's about the sanctity and the safety of America, and Biden cannot deliver that. Period. Now, whether or not he actually is the candidate, I know, we've been discussing that a lot as to whether or not he actually makes it to the finish line. And, who knows, maybe we see Gavin Newsom as, a fourth quarter audible, or even Michelle Obama possibly as a potential candidate at the convention. I think the three of us and everyone else listening and watching, we want to make sure that America is safe. And Biden does not make us safe. He puts us in jeopardy. I firmly believe that. And if it were a Republican or whomever other than Biden were the president right now and was stumbling around and mumbling around like he does, I'd say the exact same thing. Hand to God, if it were a Republican, I'd be criticizing them and I'd asking them to step aside because they're not fit to be the president of the United States.
A great point, Lee. And Joe Visconti, Joe Biden's average approval rating, Real Clear Politics average, is 40%. Gallup came out on Friday, and that number was 38.7. Joe, no president with that type of approval rating has won re-election. I mean, these are Jimmy Carter-esque numbers.
Yeah, and he won't. On Friday, Biden came out and said he will debate President Trump. So, the reality is there's fire alarms and sprinklers going off in the Oval Office, and Biden's walking around with his raincoat on and can't hear a thing. He doesn't know what's going on. It's really over for the Biden administration. That race is over. We just have to make sure that they don't try to jail Trump, or nature doesn't take over for Joe Biden. He is our president no matter what, but you don't want him dying in office and getting Kamala. So I hope he sticks out his term, because the worst Joe Biden has been than any day with Kamala Harris. I can't even imagine her being president for 5 minutes. So the other thing is
we're all sort of chuckling about it, but the fact of the matter is, look, it's astounding to me that with all the frailties, the health issues, the mental issues, how is this race even close? I mean, we can say, we're all supporting Donald Trump, which we are, okay, but, again, not to borrow from the old Mitt Romney, but 47% of the people, they're not with Donald Trump right now. I mean, I'm using that as an acronym, but in the mid-40s, this is a tight election. Every single poll has showed it. So, Lee, I mean, with all these issues, how is this race even this close?
Well, I think in the history of this country, you've never had a president with such a loyal base of fans, followers, whether you want to say it's 30%, 35%, that, consider him unflappable, unwaveable, walking on water, all of that. Unfortunately, I don't think in the history of this country has there been a president that has garnered as much hatred. So you've got this high level of love, a high level of hate. And so what you got to do is you got to get those middle people to realize Biden is just not the answer. It was, it would be a huge, colossal mistake. But Joe had referenced this earlier. I have a concern as to whether or not free and fair election. I'm still curious about 2020. I saw enough evidence to make me be skeptical about some of the states and the voting practices. So that's a concern for me. But yeah, you said earlier that there's a 40% approval rating. And the first thing that comes in my mind is, how is it possible that 40% of the people actually like this guy? It's impossible. We're in dire straits and 40% like him. It's crazy.
Well, it is, and that's why I'm sitting here thinking to myself, who are these people? Now, I get that the Democrats, at every chance they do, Lee and Joe, they pound the abortion issue, they pound January 6th. There's a big chunk of American women, particularly, that will single issue vote for a Democrat because of the abortion issue. I mean, there just is. There's a smaller number of Republican women who will vote for that issue because of Republicans' perceived stances. January 6th, the more they talk about that and try to tie it into Trump and these trials, I just don't think that has a meaningful effect on how people are going to vote. Joe, I think when you look at it and see 25, this is where I think the numbers really are. 25% of the country thinks we're moving in the right direction. 65% say no. So I'm sitting here as a reasonably accommodative political analyst, and I'm saying, wait a minute, his approval rating is somewhere from 38 to 40. 65% of Americans say we're going in the wrong direction. I get the issues with Trump. A lot of people don't like the personality, but the policies were pretty damn good. Guys, we got about 30 seconds from each of you before we go to break. How in the world can we be this tight with all those factors favoring the Republican?
Well, they could be talking to the unions during these polls. They could be talking to SEIU, teachers' unions. I mean, who knows who these polls are going to? I doubt they're going to go to people who may not pick up the phone, a cell phone if they don't have a landline. If you've ever been in the poll, and I've been in many polls as a candidate, statewide, Quinnipiac polls, etc., and the questions they asked and their leading statements are pretty. They would take any average American to calm down and not swear at them. So I'm suspect as to what the batch of voters that they're actually asking, because people, 60 or more percent of the public can't afford their car to break down. They don't have a grand in the bank. They can't come up with $100. It's that bad. So they're not answering those polls.
Lee?
I think it's TDS, right? Yeah, Trump derangement syndrome from a lot of folks. I go back to, actually, you proved my point by saying 67% of the people think we're going in the wrong direction, 40% think he's doing a good job. How does that work out? Well, it works out because people look at their life and say, well, this isn't working out. Economically, socially, all of it, it's a mess. But I dislike Trump so much, I don't care who they run against him, I'm going to vote for him. But again, we just have to figure out a way to get that middle group to say, yeah, this is not the America I want. I want something different. I do believe, like Joe believes, and I think most of America believes eventually, is that it will be Trump in this. If these are the two candidates, which we assume they are, I think it will be Trump. I think people will vote with their pocketbooks, and they will vote to oust a guy they don't think can actually do the job anymore.
Yeah, I concur with you on that. And folks, our final segment, we're going to talk about a couple key things. Robert Kennedy, mass deportation, and we got a couple other little flavors for you. Be back in 60. See you in a minute.
Listen, if we even think you owe us money, you won't know what hit you. We'll put liens on everything you own. Raid your bank accounts, retirement fund, pension. You'll open up your paycheck and cry because we'll already have the money. We'll haul you into federal court and you might even go to jail. Hey, it's our job.
Don't fight the IRS alone. The Tax Doctor is here to help you negotiate your tax bill and reduce your stress. Our experts will fight for you using IRS guidelines to stop any IRS actions like bank levies or wage garnishments. Plus, eliminate penalties and interest and reduce your past tax bill so you pay the IRS less. Help is here to deal with the IRS to reduce your stress. If you owe $10,000 or more in back taxes, do not call the IRS alone. Call a tax doctor now for a tax emergency analysis.
I'd have my mom call the number on the screen. You come see me alone. We'll work it out. Really, we will.
And we're back to close it out on a weekend. Lee, I never thought I'd see this, but a majority of Americans now believe there should be mass deportations if Donald Trump is elected. They know it's not going to happen if Biden's elected. Heck, the federal government is suing states to try to prevent illegal immigration. It's sort of the world's upside down here. But a majority of Americans now believe mass deportation, and that includes white, Black, Hispanic, Asian, you name it. What did you think, Lee, when you saw that?
I think this is certainly a trend in the right direction. I spent the week, every day this past week, I got up and one of my segments was just reading headlines from across the country of criminal activity from illegal aliens. It was rape, it was murder, it was what you name it. There were all kinds of different charges. So I just read headlines from across the country. People are beginning to let that's beginning to soak in a big way. Plus, the idea, you look at some of these cities where you've got tens of thousands of illegals taking up space, either taking up homeless facilities, veteran facilities, and then at the same time in taking up these places, they're complaining about food. They don't say they're getting enough this. They don't say they're getting enough that. And people say, wait a second, this isn't what I signed up for. So I think that the overwhelming number of illegals has actually now officially affected lives. I had been talking about this for months. I said, this is going to eventually reach the suburbs, which it has. So now these, you want to call them limousine liberals, are now seeing this effect on them, whether it's their kids at school or somebody's job that they know. So the illegal immigration scenario is now beginning to touch everybody. So whether or not we can pull off mass deportation, that remains to be seen, because that's sort of tricky. You really have to push the envelope for that. I'm for it, and I hope Trump can do it. But I think that's sort of why America is beginning to change. They really see the warts of this plan taking full hold.
Yeah, I'm with you there, Joe. I mean, mass deportation sounds good, but we have laws in this country, and I saw how hard it was under the first Trump administration just to build the wall and all the roadblocks that got thrown up. Illegal immigration had slowed to a trickle under Trump, and now we know why. Biden administration just openly welcomes it, and they, the thing Schumer did, just dismissing that Mayorkas case right out of hand, that was horrific. But how are you seeing it, Joe? I mean, there's a lot of the crime that Lee talked about. You're seeing it, the homelessness, the drug problem, the fentanyl problem. I mean, God bless him, Senator Kennedy from Louisiana, who's one of the funniest human beings you ever talked to. I mean, he shows up at the Senate thing with a fentanyl jar and shows how many people can be killed by this stuff.
Yeah,
what do you think, Joe?
I think what's going to happen is Trump is going to use his military powers, not his executive administration powers, to do something with the military. People don't understand how this really rolls, and I'm sure General Flynn could say a few things about it. But we are national security, not a risk anymore. We're under a national security assault. This is a war happening in our nation, pure and simple. It could be a civil war, but that's what it is. And whether he deports them all or stops the problems in Chicago with people being murdered every weekend by the hundreds, this is going to be a change that Trump will be forced to do. And when he comes in, otherwise he can't make promises. But the reality is, whoever is deported or not, it's telling us one thing. The general public is so dang angry at all their money going to all these other people that aren't Americans, that don't belong here, and they can't survive. They are angry. So, yeah, I mean, if they ask them a question, would you like to hang all the kill all the drug lords and the sex traffickers and hang them on a public square? They probably say yes to the poll. That's how irate they are over their finances, because they know Biden did this intentionally to them, and that the Democrats can't hide.
Well, we had a little issue out here in California, up in San Francisco area. No shock, but Representative Adam Schiff, okay, he's running against Steve Garvey for the United States Senate out here. And somehow, I don't know if you guys caught the story, but Schiff had parked his car in a parking garage in San Francisco, left his bags in there, obviously just in a golf shirt, having to go to a fundraiser. And literally, the time he got out, went back, before the bellman came to the garage, whatever, someone broke into his car and stole 2 bags. And so, Congressman Schiff actually had to go to the fundraiser like wearing a golf shirt. So, I mean, nobody is immune from these crime surge, and it doesn't seem to matter whether you're in a big city or a little city. And Lee, when we talk about the drugs, the crime, the economic benefits that people get, the problems that a lot of Americans are suffering economically, a federal government adding almost $1 trillion to the budget every 125 days, Lee, it's enough to make you want to pull your hair out. And people may not aggressively want to vote for Trump, but by God, they're not going to keep putting up with all this stuff that's going on in this country.
All the things you mentioned, on steroids. You're 100% right. So, you've got fentanyl coming across, you've got gang members coming across, you've got who knows what coming across because there's no vetting process. Plus, we haven't mentioned the sex trafficking that's coming across the southern border right now. It's absolutely despicable what these kids are having to endure from these monsters that are basically ferrying them across our southern border, and shame on anyone who thinks that this is even remotely okay. So, I want to make sure you understand, I am all about, if you can figure out a way to get the folks in who have been in here, get them out, the illegal aliens who have been in here, get them out. But like Joe had said, it's very hard to do it once they're in here. And it's sad because you've got about 10 million who have come across the border already. And it actually has changed the dynamic and the demographic in a lot of places across this country. One thought to echo what you had said about how even the most affluent areas are being affected. So yesterday there was a story about the Hamptons. There was a giant white bus, middle of the night. They have video footage of it, dumped off at least 50 people, brand new luggage bags, picked up by cars to disperse all over the Hamptons. So it's even reaching some of the richest communities in this country. And, when things start happening in those kinds of communities, maybe things will change.
Maybe the limousine liberals will start paying attention. All right, Joe, Trump, attorneys, and we're going to talk about two cases here. He seemed to be getting somewhat favorable questions. Now, he wasn't at the Supreme Court because he was in a New York court, but his lawyers arguing the immunity case before the Supreme Court, I listened to it. It doesn't sound like he may get full immunity, but it looks like it's going to be somewhere in between from zero to, meaning not zero and not full, but did it seem to you, or am I just missing here, that the Supreme Court looked like they were leaning towards awarding some type of immunity towards Trump when the decision comes down on or about July?
Well, I think the whole case was brilliant being brought by Trump because whatever occurs to Donald Trump and whatever rules the Supreme Court comes in, Joe Biden is going to suffer under that, as will Obama, as will Bill Clinton. That's what this is all about. The truth is, of course, you can't commit a crime as the president, a personal crime, but also the crimes that the Supreme Court are going to speak about. Is it a crime to do what George W. Bush did? Is it a crime to do some of these things as a professional? And that's really where I want to watch what the Supreme Court rules on, because an official act may be criminal. And so how do you thread the needle on that versus a blatant personal crime? But either way, Biden is going to be under the gun for anything that goes down for Trump is going to go down for Biden, Obama, and Clinton.
Yeah. Lee, switching to the other case, 8 days now in New York, Alvin Bragg. I don't know, but this should never, ever have reached this point. I mean, if you want to slap him on the wrist and give him a fine as a misdemeanor, okay, I could semi-understand that. But elevating a misdemeanor that was beyond the federal statute of limitations, redoing it as a state case, Lee, this just smacks us and a lot of Americans as just blatantly unfair, lawfare at its worst, and it's frankly disgusting that some of the mainstream media outlets are really trying to put this front and center, oh, Trump's bad, this is no good, on something that was really nothing more than, a finable misdemeanor at best.
Listen, I've been saying this statement for months. No victim, no crime. There's no victim, there's no crime. It should be a T-shirt. We should all be wearing it. No victim, no crime. It's this the problem is they want to create this constant illusion of Trump in court, right? So that's the lasting memory that voters have. So, oh, look, you see Trump in court, he must be a bad guy. Listen, no victim, no crime. And that's the way I see this. It's really pretty simple. Unfortunately, they're able to use this judicial power against him, and this is completely weaponizing that portion of the government. So you got to root for him in this case, because the things that he's being charged with, or allegedly charged with, just about everybody in the country has done something similar to this. Not necessarily paying people off, but overvaluing your property, etc. Everybody does that.
Yeah, and you mentioned the key piece there. There was no victims. Now, you could argue in the Stormy Daniels case, well, was she a victim? I have a hard time making a case she was a victim, okay? I mean, come on. And the absolute worst thing he could have considered, oh, wait, we wrote it off as expense instead of this, that you get a little fine, boom, you move on. Listen, other campaigns have been slapped with similar type situations. Look what Hillary Clinton's campaign, very similar, got a slap on the wrist, and they moved on. Look, we only got a couple minutes left, but I do want to get your predictions on this. We got all these college wackos right now, anti-Israel. They're doing their sit-ins and whatnot. The Democratic convention's coming up in where? Chicago. Joe, I know you weren't there in 1968, but you know about what happened at the Democratic convention in 1968. Lee, as do you. Are we setting up for another summer of hot, humid Chicago with all these whacked out protesters gathering in the Windy City?
I remember watching it on TV in 68, but what's really funny is in 67, before 68, they had the war in Israel. And so in 2023, we had October 7th. This is really weird. I don't want to be conspiracy theorist here, but yeah, it's a big problem. And that's where I think they're headed. I think they're going to head to the Democrat Party. It's collapsing, and there's nothing they can do about it. Just like Lyndon Johnson bowed out, and then Hubert Humphrey came in, and Bobby Kennedy Sr. was shot. It was just so many things look like they're coming back in a cycle. It's very strange to watch.
Lee?
Now, one thing to watch too with this, and I think it will be chaos in Chicago if in fact things remain the same. I'm a little bit nervous for some of these communities where a lot of these protesters are lying in wait. Because if you don't see any movement, like if they don't see movement in the direction that makes them happy, the next step to peaceful protests are violent protests. So you may see an escalation, a bomb blast here, a gunshot here, an attack over there. That's something I would keep a close eye on here in the next couple of weeks, because if they don't get any movement in what they consider movement in this whole Gaza scenario, you may see them escalate these protests into something a little bit more violent. But as far as what's going to happen in Chicago, if it's status quo over in Israel, which I totally expect it to be exactly the same, I think you're going to see some violence in Chicago for sure.
And I don't want to put the Republicans at ease either, because Milwaukee's not too far from Chicago. And you better believe if the protesters and antagonists are in Chicago, they're probably going to be in Milwaukee too, because that's just sort of how it is in this country now. Everybody protests everything, but that's the place we're living in. And Joe, to your point, did you ever think you'd have a situation where, 1968 Chicago, 1968 Bobby Kennedy, and yet another Kennedy is going to have an effect on this race? I'm not buying what pollsters were selling that he's taken more away from Trump than Biden. I don't believe that. We'll see as it gets closer. But one thing is for certain, Kennedy is going to have an effect on this race, folks. And it's still too early to say. There you go, Joe. Whether it's going to affect Donald Trump more.
I just got a text message from Bobby Kennedy, okay? Here's what it says real quick. I know we're out of time. Hi, Joe. Team Kennedy here. The DNC calls RFK Jr. a right-wing extremist, and Trump calls him a left-wing lunatic. Want to check out a 2-minute video for the real story?
We can't make this stuff up. It really happens. Listen, Lee and Joe, thank you for joining me today. It is always a lot of fun having you guys on the show. And listen, folks, we try to tell it like it is. Patriot.tv, stick with it. We've got a great lineup. General Flynn's doing fantastic on his tour. Get the movie, get the DVD, support General Flynn. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next weekend.